Welcome back. Today we are talking about purity culture and the dangers that it poses, the abuse that goes on within, and we're going to talk about how to take steps toward healing and fostering a healthier view of sexuality and self and relationships, so that we can remove the stigma that a lot of us learned when we were younger, and for older generations as well. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Runions Have Layers, the podcast where two siblings explore the many layers of life and mental wellness, where vulnerability meets strength and where every shared story is a step towards self-discovery. Join us as we peel back the layers. If you would like to be notified of upcoming episodes, sign up for our email list at runionshavelayers.com. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend and leave us a rating or review.
When we talk about purity culture, I hadn't really actually heard that term until you had mentioned it to me. Not in those specific terms, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had to do my own research and kind of just like get a sense of what that was for context. But after I started reading about what encompasses purity culture and kind of what's surrounded by it, it's like, oh yeah, like I've definitely seen that. I definitely know what you're talking about now, but I just hadn't really ever had a name to it. Um, and obviously, like I feel like I'm a little bit a fish out of water in terms of talking about a lot of this stuff. So I think that I'm going to learn a lot from you today, actually, talking about this and your experiences and how I feel like it's something that really impacts females and female identifying people a lot more
Mm-hmm.
because of just the way that religion is set up and our society is set up to view and talk about sexuality and women, gender roles, things like that. So I'm excited to start talking and dive in with this with you. I'm actually been looking forward to this episode a little bit because I feel like it really is a place that I can learn a lot and take away from. So
The term purity culture is something that was new to me. I knew what the experience was from when I was younger, but I didn't realize that it was like this whole movement and had a name until really a couple of years ago. And essentially, what it is this movement to keep women pure and virgins until marriage. Um, and there was a lot of different ways that um, and a lot of different messages that were given, specifically when I was a teenager. This was in the 90s, so that's when I was a teenager. But the one thing that I know has affected a lot of people, including myself, is I had such a dysfunctional relationship with my body, with sex, with people I was in relationships with. Um, and I don't want to say it's like a love hate relationship, but there was a lot of shame involved, a lot of guilt, a lot of feeling like I was doing the wrong thing, because what was preached was sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, unless you're married. And then all of a sudden you're expected to flip a switch and enjoy intimacy with somebody, when that's literally all you've heard for years is how bad it is. And that was really hard for me when I first got married. Um, and I remember him saying, "Holly, we're married. Like, it's okay." And it was a really weird it was a really weird thing to try and reconcile in my brain. And even still today, there's
yeah.
sometimes that, as we've talked about, some of that old messaging comes up. But it was being a virgin. I mean, I swear, I feel like we talked about it at youth group all the time, about being pure and, not dressing a certain way, because, we don't want the teenage boys to stumble and to, if you look,
Hmm.
if you look once, it's curiosity. If you look twice, it's lust, stuff like that, that now that I'm older, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
crazy. I don't know if you experienced much of that as a male growing up in the church, and then also about a decade after I did, but for me, it was like front and center all the time. They had conferences about it. Christian bands had songs
Wow.
about it. I mean, it was crazy.
Wow. Yeah, it wasn't super front and center like that. Not in that way, but we definitely talked about it. I feel like because you went to youth group in California and I went to youth group in Arkansas,
Hmm.
and I that those two worlds are very different. And I feel like in my youth group growing up, it was kind of like something you just didn't talk about. Everyone knew you shouldn't do it.
Mm.
It was kind of like you just didn't want to talk about it. It was just like, just don't say those words kind of thing. Um, and there, I mean, there were certain times that it was brought up, but it wasn't as explicit as
Hmm.
you probably grew up hearing. At least to my remembering, I can't recall anything that specific, but I do remember, like purity rings and people wearing those, and that being a very big thing. And like, like if there were two people that, they were dating and they had been dating and maybe they were really serious, they would each like get a purity ring, and they would wear a purity ring, like, oh, we're not going to have sex until marriage kind of thing. And like growing up in school, I remember growing up in school and I was like, that's so weird. Like, why, like, why? And so I guess from like my own perspective, I didn't really understand that. But um, yeah, like to answer your question about my perspective in terms of like that, like looking at a girl and like maybe not, you said look once and shame on you, look twice and it's lust, whatever, and don't let the boy stumble. Um, I definitely heard stuff like that too. Like there was a lot of that language about, and I think that really kind of starts to talk about gender roles and,
Hmm.
how it's like it's okay for a man to do this, but it's not okay for a woman to, or like this, just like this structure that society has built, um, that are really on the foundation of religion in general, in my opinion, is that like, women are not allowed to dress a certain way because it might make men want to rape them.
Hmm.
But it's okay if men do that because the woman was dressed, provocatively or whatever. And it's like, no, that's victim blaming, first of all. And like, what makes it okay for a man to do that just because someone's dressed a certain way? And I mean, I think that's sort of like the premise I feel of purity culture, and purity culture is obviously a much like more innocent level. It's not that serious, but those are the types of mindsets and the types of language and the types of messaging that makes a man raping a woman okay, is because
Yeah.
they start to set this up and to set this role up that women are on one level and men are on a different level and they're not equal playing fields. Um,
Hmm.
and so I
And the
think that's really
feeling,
the danger of purity culture.
yeah. So I remember hearing those types of messages a lot. I don't have direct knowledge of men or boys being excused from abuse. I have heard that of happening with other people that I know and in other churches. I just want to say I didn't have that experience, but those messages that we receive those messages frequently, like, we could never wear two-piece bathing suits, God forbid, at the lake or the beach or wherever we were going.
Yeah.
Couldn't show our shoulders, and skirts had to be, fingertip length from the knees, or whatever.
Couldn't show your
And
shoulders.
yeah, in some
So
circumstances.
sexy.
And then, yeah, like if we went to camp, we couldn't wear tank tops, stuff
Oh
like
my
that.
gosh.
um but yeah, I mean, we received the message over and over that we as women, as girls, are responsible for men's actions. That
Mm.
we are solely responsible for, them stumbling, them lusting, them raping, touching, any of those kinds of things. now it wasn't explicitly said you're responsible if a man rapes you, but like you were saying, victim blaming, like what were you wearing and how are you acting? And, it put
Hmm.
all of the pressure on us as girls and as women. And I just thought that was normal. I just,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that I had grown up like under this idea and assumption that I'm responsible for other people, and also with a lack of boundaries, a lack of understanding about sexual health and sexual and protection. And it's like I knew, we went through sex ed in school, and it
I
wasn't,
didn't.
it wasn't. Were you pulled out of it? Because
They didn't have it.
oh, they didn't. Oh, okay.
It
Because they
wasn't
did.
even offered. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I
Bible
mean,
Belt, baby.
I didn't have a really clear understanding about all of that kind of stuff. And not even just that, but I didn't have a healthy view of sex for a long time because like I said, it was always like sex is bad, sex is bad. And then even when I was married and in relationships, it 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 becomes this psychological hump that you're trying to get over, and it can affect you physically, can cause pain, anxiety, all kinds of different things that affect not just the physical act but the intimacy, the emotional intimacy, and all the other parts of the relationship. And that was happening to me, and I didn't even realize that's what it was. It was compounded by other sexual abuse. um, but a lot of that was because I never had any boundaries. I didn't know how to say no, or and
Hmm.
I'm not placing blame. It is what it is. But looking at all of the different circumstances, there are so many times that I think if I would have been informed, if I would have been taught differently, if I would have been, taught about how to have a healthy view of sex and a healthy view of my body, that things could have turned out so differently. And
Yeah.
then I think about the conversations that I've had with mom and dad as an adult, and I see now why they didn't have those conversations with us. It was very like just something you don't talk about, hush hush. And then
Hmm.
of course their parents never talked to them about sex because it was taboo back when they were
Hmm.
teenagers. And like
Right.
we've talked about with other mental health things, it just rolls downhill. And
Yeah.
as I've gotten older, I'm able to have more of those conversations. um you know with I did with dad before he died. But I wanted to have I mean, not explicit conversations, but with my kids, I'm like,
Yeah. Right.
listen, you guys want to do adult things? We're going to have adult conversations. We're going to talk about, all of the things. And it's not like
Hmm.
it's just something we sit around and talk about, but
Yeah.
we've been
Right.
open about those types of things because I don't want it to be some hush hush taboo. It's something that is so natural, innate in us as human animals. And I remember when I was in like sixth grade, I don't know, it was like 12. And I had a crush on this boy at church. We were like boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. And we were kissing after church in like this hidden, or we thought it was hidden. So, and somebody saw us and we got in trouble. Like I got grounded. We got shamed for it. We were told how bad it was and how we shouldn't do it. And it's something that is totally natural. Like your hormones are
Yep.
starting to, you're going through puberty and all this. And instead of saying like, yeah, that's natural, you're going to feel these feelings, blah blah blah, I was taught that we shouldn't do it. It was bad that I was kissing someone else's husband, which I mean technically turned out to be true. We didn't get married, but still, like all of those types of things. I remember just like bawling, crying, feeling so ashamed that I got caught kissing. It was this huge like scandal.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
about it
The
now, I'm like,
fear-based.
holy cow, yeah.
Yeah. All based in fear. Yeah. I wish that more people were like willing to talk about sexual things because I feel like just the more that you are open with that, the more that you understand, and the more that you understand about yourself, like what other people like, what's okay, what's not okay, like you're saying boundaries,
Hmm.
because yeah, like I never got the sex talk either. I don't think any of us did. And I had to
Hmm.
learn from school and friends and porn and all these different outlets because my parents wouldn't talk to me about it. They didn't want to. I don't even think they ever mentioned sex to me, not one time. Um, like not how it works, like I nothing. I learned it all on my own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and then you have this certain idea of what it's supposed to be, what the expectation is, what a man is supposed to do, what a woman's supposed to do, how is all of that informed? And I think that, what you were saying about you had a lot of these psychological and physical things is because, and you had no boundaries, is because you wouldn't talk, no one would talk about it, first of all. But then you have the only context you really have is this religious context where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you're a woman, this is your role, this is what you're supposed to do, and this is your duty, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote. And and you have this idea that, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do, so you don't have the wherewithal to even question that. You're just like, this is what I've learned, and this is what I'm doing, and this is what I think is right. Um, and when you don't have any other like context to that, you don't even want to challenge that. And something this reminds me of, I just got done watching the documentary about the 7M management and Shekinah, which has been around for like over 2 decades, but it just recently resurfaced. And they went to the police, um, and the leader of this cult was sexually abusing um, some people and was like using religion as a way to do that. He called himself the man of God, and in order for them to get closer to God, they had to please the man or do things, for him and whatever. And so some of the people left the cult and they went to the police, and the first person who went, they said, you need to find more women to come and file a claim because one is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like goes to show you that, like, they say that that sexual assault is a crime, but then they don't want to take women seriously when they report a sexual assault because one is
Mm-hmm.
not enough. It's all built against women. And it's like, even after getting 3 or 4 women, he still hasn't been charged with a crime.
Yeah.
And it's like, you said one wasn't enough, and then we got 3 or 4, and that's still not enough. So what else do you need, So that it just reminds me of this, and like how men are just allowed to kind of do what they want. I know every situation is different and not every man is the same, but in this particular situation, it reminds me of that, of like how, this idea that women serve this kind of role, um, it's just reinforced by this purity culture. And I was thinking about this episode as I was watching that. And I was like, man, this is where it all really stems from, and the things that he was teaching them and the things that he was saying. And they were so convinced that they just had to do this in order to be closer to God. And they did it because that's what he said was going to happen. And they
Right.
believed it, and they didn't even question it.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought the abuse aspect up because it has long been believed that rape cannot happen within marriage. And as young women, we're taught, that we're responsible for men and their feelings and their lust and, all of those kinds of things. And then you get married, and the messages that we receive as women at some churches, not all churches, is obligatory sex. Like, men have needs, so even if you don't feel like it, do it for him because you'll grow closer and it's God's will and blah blah blah. And that has never sat well with me ever.
Yeah, me neither.
Nobody should be subjected to just have sex because they're supposed to. I mean, it's
Hmm.
and that message is still being taught today in modern Christian churches here in the United States. So purity culture is rape culture.
How do they
Period.
frame it in modern day churches? Do they frame it that way, and that, like,
Mm-hmm.
explicitly in that way? Really?
Yeah. One of the most recent churches I attended, I don't think it was the most recent, the one before that, I think. I can't remember. They all kind of blend together now. But yeah, I mean, every like once a year or twice a year, they have messages about relationships and, yeah. And one of the messages was, even if you don't feel like it, men have needs and he's going to be less stressed and, all of these things. And it's that, yeah, that's the messaging that we're taught as women.
Wow.
Like I said, in
That's like
some
the
organizations.
1950s, man. Like
Yeah, I
how
remember.
the man
Yeah,
is the
when I got,
provider and the woman is the home caretaker and everything. That's
hmm
very like that's old fashioned as hell.
yeah, yeah, it is very
Wow.
much so. And that has never sat well with me. And even more so in the last couple of years. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, it's something that you mentioned like shame and guilt and feeling these emotions, when you're even after you're in a relationship and you're married and things. And I can totally relate to that because there was this constant messaging that, you can't kiss, you can't have sex before marriage, you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. After I got married, um, it was really hard even after I was married. I mean, I had sex before I was married, but even after I was married, I was like, I'm married and I still feel this way. So, like, what's
hmm
up with that? Like, I thought it was okay to do this. And once you're married, then it's like, you still have this, like, feeling that you're doing something wrong because this whole time you've been told if you do this, if you do that, you're a sinner and you're going to go to hell
hmm
for having sex before marriage. And, uh, that is just like crazy. Um, that that's just like the messaging that you get growing up.
Well, I want to go back to, well, also along the lines of shame and guilt, but the lack of, like we talked about, sex education, at least within our household, the lack of discussing the menstrual cycle and how women, like I knew women get pregnant, they have babies, and I knew that when you have sex, that happens. And I knew a little bit about protection, but I didn't know any of the specifics, and that opens the door for sexually transmitted diseases and infections and all kinds of things that then some people that I know, when they experience, they feel like they can't even tell their parents they get proper medical care and all of those kinds of things, and that just
Hmm.
compounds, the issue.
Yeah, it's like when you don't have any like understanding of what is happening, you don't know how to deal with it. And then whenever you are felt to feel shameful and guilty for it, it makes you not want to tell your parents who are supposed to be there to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And but if the parents had been educating them this whole time, they would know, oh, I need to wear a condom or use a condom. I need to do this and do that. And like they would know how to be safe about it instead of feeling like they have to sneak around and do it in private. I mean, they should do it in private, but like, like they feel like they have to hide it from everyone because if someone finds out, then they're going to be, called a whore or they're going to be called a sinner at church or people are going to shame them and guilt them for it. It's like, but it's natural and everyone does it. Everyone wants to do it for the most part. So like, I don't understand why everyone has to make it this big ordeal that like, we're not going to talk about it, you know?
Yeah,
And uh, yeah,
it's
I just
always
don't
like so
understand
hush
that.
hush and inappropriate when
Hmm.
it's like you said, it's something that's natural that almost everybody engages in or has an interest in. And that's something that I guess I didn't realize growing up, is that it is something that everybody talks about because it was presented as such a like an inappropriate thing to talk about. So to me, it wasn't like a normal part of life or a normal part of anybody's lived experience, because it was presented to me as that's something that we don't do.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And even outside of, kids learning about sex and things like that, I think just like as an adult, that it carries over into adulthood where then,
Hmm.
you're dating someone and you don't talk about sex and everyone has sexual preferences, but they like people don't talk about it. Or like if you're into something that is kind of weird and freaky and then people start judging you about it because
Mm-hmm.
that's something that you find pleasure in, or that you turned on by, or whatever. Like, I wish more people were more open and accepting to just talking about sex in general, but I feel like people not wanting to do that stems from a lot of these values that are instilled in people, that like it's wrong, you shouldn't do it, it's taboo, it's, you just don't talk about it, it's something that you just do, and it's always vanilla. And it's like, no, like that's not the way that people live their sex life most of the time. I don't. And
Yeah.
so
Well, and a lot of
I just
people
wish more
don't
people talked
even,
about stuff.
yeah, a lot of people don't even talk about that because they don't even realize that there is this whole world outside of vanilla that you can
Hmm.
experience, and that everyone, and that even if it's not somebody else's cup of tea, that doesn't make it bad or wrong, or and
Yeah.
those kinds of things are so important because compatibility, that's something that again is not talked about. And
Yeah.
it's not anything I learned about, that there's different sex drives, high and low, and reactive and non-reactive, and like all these kinds of things. And it's like that would have been so incredibly helpful, going into
Hmm.
relationships and knowing how to be prepared for those conversations, and knowing that it's okay to have those conversations, especially if you're married. It's like that's your
Yeah.
person that you're the most, like, the closest to. And it was
Hmm.
it was nothing that I ever felt comfortable talking about, at least when I was,
Hmm.
younger, because I got married really young.
I don't even think that compatibility in general was ever really talked about. It was
Mm-mm.
always preached that, you have the one, you have a person out there. There's only one person in the whole world for you, which to
Such
start was
bullshit.
just like,
I
yeah,
know.
I just did not, I never bought into that at all. I was like, there's no fucking way in this whole world there's one person. And then how am I supposed to find that one person if I am only in a country, and I'm in a state, and I'm supposed to just magically meet them in the church I go to? There's one person in the
Mm-hmm.
whole world? No. Um, and so that's a whole other thing. But um, just like the idea of compatibility and communication and like interests and things like that, that was not really something that mom and dad never talked to me about. I never heard
Mm-hmm.
about from anyone really. That was like stuff that I learned on my own, like doing research and like learning about astrology and like tarot card stuff, and I'm just like stuff that is not religious essentially. Like I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's where I got a lot of my guidance on how do I find someone that I'm compatible with, besides just, do they like the same music? Do they like the same food as me? Like there's so much
Right.
more to how we get along with people than just our interests. And no one ever talked about that in church. No one.
Mm-mm. No, the one and the most important thing was, are they a Christian? That was the most important thing. And I remember
Yeah.
being in sort of a relationship with somebody that I met at basic training in the army, and I came back and someone was like, well, is he a Christian? And I cut everything off. I mean, we could have had a great relationship. I mean, who knows now? I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, but still, way back then, and it's like I listened to somebody else because I didn't have my own sense of self. I didn't have any boundaries. I didn't really even know what I believed. And I just,
Yeah.
that was the most important thing, was whether or not they're Christian, not whether or not you're compatible in any other
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, this Bible verse that I remember always being talked about when we were growing up was about being unequally yoked.
Mm-hmm.
It says, "Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for that fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness." That's King James, so it's hard to read. But the NIV says, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common?" And it's just like this idea that if you are, if you're with someone that's not a Christian, or you believe in one thing and someone else believes in another, then of course you're not going to be compatible, because you both have to be Christians, you both have to believe in God, and you both have to have the same values system and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that was really always pushed about, being with someone who's a Christian,
Right.
um, and that's just that mentality that you had to have the same belief system, which I
Right.
think
And
is
then if you
important just
had,
in relationships in general. I think that's important to have similar values, but I don't think it's like totally like a deal breaker necessarily.
Yeah. And then if you had relationship problems, it's because you were unequally yoked, you know?
Yeah. It's like,
Um,
see, it's because you're
yeah.
unequally yoked.
Well, and something else that I want to point out when we were talking about the rape culture and the abuse and all of that is even the stories in the Bible that get preached in congregation, like to everyone in the church, is one about how the Virgin Mary was impregnated by the Holy Spirit, okay, without her consent. And that is the main story of Christianity, is basically the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit raped Mary. Okay. And then
Mhm.
King David and Bathsheba, King
Oh
David
my
was like,
gosh, yes.
yeah, the man after God's own heart. And he saw her bathing on the roof or whatever, and they had sex. That's not what happened. She didn't have a choice. Back then, a woman did not have a choice to say yes or no. It
Hmm.
wasn't like, oh,
And he
but
was the
the way it was
king.
presented, yeah, the way it was presented was they sinned. No, he sinned. But that's not
Hmm.
how it's taught. It's taught like, oh, he's the man after God's own heart. And then he continued to rule. And then they talk about how God blessed him. And it's like, so the messages that we're receiving as women is that we don't have a choice, we don't have a say, consent doesn't matter, boundaries don't matter. Men can do whatever the hell they want to do, and we just have to be happy with it and pretend like we're in this happy
Yeah.
relationship. And
Right.
and all this messaging was happening when I didn't even have the words to articulate what it was and how I was feeling about it. So imagine all this coming at you, when I mean at 15, 16, or whatever, when yeah, you're old enough to understand things, but you're still learning about the world, and this is like normal for you, but
Yeah.
then your
And your
your other
brain hasn't
friends
even
at
fully
school.
developed yet either. You're still forming all of your ideas and your
Exactly.
value systems and all of those high level thinking skills. And not
Hmm.
to mention that not only were you taught those things about your role, but then you're taught that, oh well, men do this and then they get rewarded for it, and then they
Hmm.
prosper still because even though they did something that is supposed to be wrong, and not that people can't be forgiven, but in that particular scenario and context, it's like, what about Bathsheba? They didn't mention anything about her, having prosperity and like all
Mm-mm.
these all these things later in life, and it's just very, yeah, like the messaging that you get is like you're saying, it's like these are the things that are okay and not okay, that are not in line with reality, essentially.
Hmm. Yeah, well, there's a lot of stories like this in the Bible, but another one is Rachel and Leah were the women, and the man wanted to marry one of them, and the father tricked him into marrying the one he didn't want to marry, and they ended up having sex, and they consummated their marriage. And it's like that all that kind of stuff. And it's like that all of those, I don't know how
Manipulation.
they, yeah, I don't know how they turned those into positive messages for us.
Yeah.
It was like
Right.
he loved I can't remember which one of the sisters, but he loved this one so much that he waited 14 years for her. And I'm like, that was the message. Not
Hmm.
that there was manipulation and control and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and not to excuse or make any of this right, but the time period of this when this happened, um, when the Bible was supposed to be written, like the way that women were used as pawns and property essentially to gain, um, you know like power and control, like for example, like kings who would marry someone from another country because they wanted to like make some sort of connection with that country or ally or whatever. They would use women
Hmm.
as a way to do that, to bring the families together, even if the women mostly never wanted to do that, I'm sure, 9 times out
Yeah.
of 10. And I'm not saying that that's okay, but I think in the context of that story, it probably is normal, and I think now that we, like so many years later, we're having a conversation about this, that you know because we can be open about it, and we can, you can speak your mind about how you want it. But it hasn't always been that way. You know, even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I don't think we'd be able to have this conversation about like that particular thing and then how it's affecting you and like your views on that. So I think it's important to acknowledge like how far our society has come in being able to talk about a lot of the things and how much more agency women have over their own bodies, with the caveat
Hmm.
of recent developments with like Roe v. Wade and things like that, which are bullshit. Did you see that message I sent you yesterday about the article that they just voted that they're trying to make contraception a federal right, and they voted that down because they said that it was an overstep on the government. But it's okay for the government to decide whether or not someone can get an abortion, but they can't govern on whether or not it's okay to have a right for contraception. So I just like that the hypocrisy of that the Christianity foundation. It
Hmm.
just like goes to speak even more to this whole idea of purity culture, that is their prerogative, is they want to keep women in a place. They want to be able to have these gender roles be defined. And I don't understand what's the big deal. I really don't get it.
Yeah, and even in some denominations, Catholicism for sure. I don't know about others, but I was even taught when not taught like by our parents or by the church. It was like the general consensus around the people that I was hanging out as a young adult that birth control technically causes an abortion. And so birth control is wrong and bad and whatever. And within this conversation, nobody ever talks about men being responsible for birth control or men being able to have a vasectomy because it can be reversed. No one ever talks about that. It's always about the woman being responsible for the birth control and being responsible for not getting pregnant.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely the messaging that they have been talking about for so many years. And um, Catholicism, for sure, they definitely teach that it's like something that you shouldn't do. Um, I didn't ever get any of that messaging specifically about it like causing an abortion or anything like that. Not that
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't taught, but it definitely, I do remember a lot of messaging being about like, not really explicitly, but more implicitly that it's the woman's responsibility. It's on them. It's kind of, I don't know how else to say it. But yeah, and it's like this weird thing that like you have to take responsibility for your actions. And
Mm-hmm.
if it's consensual, you both are making a choice to do this act, and you both have to take responsibility for whatever implications that is, whether there
Right.
are or there are not. And I just wish that was more. I wish the idea of contraception and birth control and things like that were more available, to where it wouldn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be like, oh, well, I have to pay for this, and it becomes a whole financial thing sometimes for people. If they don't have insurance, if their insurance doesn't
Mm-hmm.
cover it, if they live in a state where it's not accessible, whatever, then it becomes this cost on women to have this like safe environment to be able to have sex whenever um like men don't have to deal with that, really.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, so we talked about some of the, we talked about relationship stuff. We've talked about a lot of like the main beliefs and practices of kind of what purity culture is and how it defines like gender roles and things like that. And we also sort of talked a little bit about some of the physical implications, and like sort of having this obligation and mental consequences and stuff like that. What about, let's talk about like how people use this as a way to manipulate and to control. Do you think that I'm sure, I know it does, but I want to get your opinion on how do you feel like if it did manifest in your upbringing in church and things like that, do you feel people use this as a way of like manipulating or controlling, um, maybe in messaging or maybe in a different way?
I think not overtly. And I think, yes, but a lot of times people probably didn't even realize that what they were saying was manipulative because the people before them said it and the people before them said it. But yeah, the messaging of being responsible for men's actions and their feelings and all that. I mean, yeah, that's manipulative and controlling right there. I didn't, in relationships, I didn't experience that specifically. It was a point of contention always, because it was something, I was still dealing with the guilt and the shame and, all those feelings. But for me, it wasn't. I know that, there are other relationships that it has been. But for me, it wasn't, thankfully.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight again the fact of like how important having conversations like this are, especially to uh, younger folks who are, first learning about sex, or they're, just starting to learn about their bodies, and how important it is to really just have open conversations. If you're a parent listening, just keep this in mind, that like the
Mhm.
things that they're learning and how you can open up those conversations. I would rather be a parent and be the person talking to my kid, because at least I know they're getting good information that's reliable,
Mhm.
that is valuable, that are based on things that I've learned. Like, these are things you need to look out for. You need to definitely do this. If you have any issues, if you have any questions, please come talk to me. I want you to feel like you are safe enough to come do that. I'm not going to be mad, but I want you to feel like you can come talk to me. And I think it's great that you're doing that with your kids. I think that's amazing that you are continuously opening up those conversations to have the hard conversations that we never had. Um, so I really applaud you for that. I think that is amazing. And I think that more parents should not be afraid to do that. It's like if
Mhm.
they don't do that, it's really speaks more about their insecurity and their willingness to just have an honest, open conversation with their kids. I don't know why. Do they feel like it's going to be embarrassing to them, or it's just
Yeah, well, I
uncomfortable? Like,
think
I mean, I don't know.
I think a lot of adults, because sex has always been a taboo subject in their families, in a lot of people, not all families, they don't have the words to articulate, or don't have the comfort level to talk to anybody, but specifically their kids. And that's something that has never really bothered me. I'm like, I just am a blunt person. I say things how they are. And that sex has not been an uncomfortable topic for me to talk about. Has it embarrassed my kids at some point? Yeah, but we've also had some really good, very honest conversations about consent and trust and protection and all of these kinds of things. And there have been times where they have come to me with questions that I was actually surprised, not surprised at the question, but surprised that they felt comfortable enough coming to me to ask about those things. Within their relationships or whatever. And that's something that, it's not something that we talk about all the time. They're older now, but it's something that um, they know that the door's open for sure.
Yeah. So eh, I think we're coming to the end, but I just, before we end, I want to talk about ways that you have moved beyond religion, and ways that you've, I guess, I don't know if healing is the right word for this, but like, I guess, reframed some of
Hmm.
this in terms of purity culture and moving away from the religious ideology. And I, it's probably a little kind of like gray area because you're a lot older now. You've learned a lot about who you are, regardless of being in religion or not. But I'm just curious if you have any, any, I guess, last words about sort of how you can move beyond purity culture in the context of religion, and like going beyond is essentially
Yeah.
what I
I
mean.
think it's different for everybody. For me, it was a lot of therapy and learning about my own body and becoming comfortable with my body, because the messaging wasn't like directly like to like not love yourself or not like your body, but for me the two were very much connected. So learning to love myself and to be comfortable in my own skin, and also being comfortable talking about it. And thankfully in the relationship that I'm in right now, my husband and I have an open communication, but he also, and a lot of this is probably because of his age. He's a little bit older than I am. Um, isn't as comfortable saying those things out loud as I am. I'm like, it's just us. We're married. Like, it's okay to talk about. And so for me, the healing came from, or the moving past came from, just saying, screw it, I'm going to talk about it. This is like reminding myself that this is a natural, normal thing that humans do. And
Yep.
that, I'm not saying that will help for everybody, but a lot of the things that I felt guilt and shame around, I would remind myself, this is natural. Like humans
Hmm.
do this. It's not something that you need to be ashamed, of. And there's still things that come up for me, but overall, generally, I would say that things have drastically improved.
Thank you for joining us and peeling back the layers today. If you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to support it, please share it with others, and please leave a review, like, subscribe, all that jazz. For more information about us, you can visit runionshavelayers.com, where you can find how to get connected with us and find resources mentioned in our episodes. Bye for now.